Hello, happy Monday. Welcome to episode 320 of Stand Up. Joining me today for a very special conversation, voting rights activist Frank White. I'm Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now. Stand up. Hello, my friends. I hope that you had a good weekend. I am so happy to have you joining me here on Stand Up. I have a very cool guest joining me today. Because of how I met him at school, his work, his life is really interesting, and I'm so happy that you are going to listen to my conversation with Frank White. Frank's sister, Frances, has been a longtime listener of this show, and through her, I met Frank. We met Frank, many of us, on our Zoom hangouts throughout the pandemic. Frank would stop in because he was living with his sister during that time, and Frank really held court so often when he showed us his passion and talked about his work as a volunteer and then an organizer for several different political campaigns. And I'll tell you more about him on the introduction, but I'm really very excited about our conversation and sharing it with you today. I had an excellent weekend. By that, I mean I worked all weekend. Outside, that is, I built, or I should say we built, an entire new shed. See, I moved my studio out here to the shed because I wanted to be surrounded by nature. I wanted to have a separate space, all of my own, to be able to do my work, to be able to yell and scream and cry and do whatever I needed to be doing to get this podcast done for you each and every day. So I had to have a new shed because I do a lot of stuff around the house outside and in the garden, and I got a lot of tools and a lot of things that I'm always fiddling around with. So the house has been basically a junkyard since I cleaned this shed out to build the studio at the end of summer. And you know how that can be when your house is cluttered, inside or outside. If you're like me, it means your mind is cluttered too. And this has been going on for almost a year, really, and where I just haven't had any space. So I'm so excited that this new shed is almost complete, and mostly I'm excited that I had the kindness and generosity of Tom Herman to help me. This community of listeners is so great, helping each other, helping me out, working with each other, becoming friends with each other. Tom and Leslie are the co-owners of Noble Pies. You may have heard me talk about them. They are integral members of this community. They've become good friends of ours. We met them years ago when we first went horseback riding at their place in Warwick, New York, which is also where their business is. Noble Pies, noblepies.com. Get all your pies at Noble Pies. And we've remained friends. We spent a lot of time with them. They've come to a whole bunch of my shows, and they've been super supportive of me in every possible way. And in a new way this weekend, when Tom came down and said, you know what, I'll help you out with the shed. And Tom can pretty much do anything, including making pie. So this guy comes, he brings all his tools, all of his years of experience. And guess what else he brought? Pies. That's right. A chocolate cream pie, a key lime pie, and my favorite, the mixed berry pie. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, all of you, for your kindness and generosity. And I'm very excited about my new shed. Look for pictures in the subscriber email. If you're a subscriber, you can see the whole thing. I shared it on the daily email, which you also get. And if you aren't a subscriber, sign up right now. Go to patreon.com/standup or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. And a quick note or threat, I may be doing some lighter podcast posting this week, and that means maybe only one guest, or maybe no news segment, or maybe no show. My daughters have spring break. My wife and my younger daughter, Julia, are taking a trip for a few days, Wednesday to Saturday, and I'm going to try to do some stuff with Ava. So we'll see how much I get done this week. Thank you so much for supporting me. And now let's get to the headlines. It's time for The Last 24. Well, the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin for, however his name is pronounced, I really don't care, for killing a helpless man named George Floyd will start today. And it's certain to be a defining moment in the long, ugly chapter of our racial history. COVID headlines. In the UK, the Prime Minister is urging caution as England is taking the first big step out of lockdown. Paris doctors are warning of catastrophic overload. Mexico's true toll is 60% higher than the official figure, ! And in Brazil, a lot of folks are disregarding pleas to stay home. Also, discarded face masks are killing wildlife worldwide. That's all we need is more things to litter. And 4 people are dead in Nashville after historic and deadly flooding. All right, let me get some sound for you from the Sunday shows, where the big topics, of course, were immigration, guns, voting rights, and, of course, COVID, which is where I'm going to start. Well, there are still concerns, rumors, conspiracies that the COVID-19 virus was developed in a lab and it either escaped or was purposely put into the human population. And there apparently is no evidence of that as of yet. Dr. Fauci was asked about this, though, on CBS's Face the Nation, and here was his answer to the moderator, Margaret Brennan.
What is your opinion on how COVID became so well adapted to humans?
You know, Margaret, that's an argument that goes back and forth. A very plausible explanation for this is that this virus jumped from an animal host, a bat, to maybe an intermediate host, and then to a human. And we didn't see it, we being at first the Chinese, and it was under the radar screen. And we know that infections, many of them, are without symptoms. So it's entirely conceivable that it was spreading considerably for weeks, if not months, before we recognized it at the end of December, giving it plenty of time to adapt to a human. And that would really be completely consistent with just jumping species in the wild. The other theory that people have is that somehow it did that in a lab and it accidentally escaped. I mean, those are just varying opinions. I think the most likely one, that in nature, in the wild, it adapted itself.
Over on ABC's This Week, John Carl, who was hosting, had Dr. Ajish Shah on, and he asked him if maybe we would be even better conditioned, in better shape by July 4th than Joe Biden, President Biden, said we would. Remember, he said by July 4th, we should be able to get together and have some barbecues, small gatherings, etc. Well, here it is.
And he invoked the idea that we'll be able to have small family gatherings, barbecues in the backyard, small gatherings, family. I mean, at that point, if we're really fully vaccinated, I mean, can't we be doing more than just having family over in the backyard? Aren't we looking at a wider opening?
So I do think we're looking at a wider opening. I think the question is, will everything be safe? Will everything that we used to do in 2019 be safe? And my take is, even by July 4th, my expectation is that some proportion of Americans will have chosen not to get vaccinated. So they're still going to be at risk. And we probably should avoid those sort of large indoor gatherings where we know the virus tends to spread more efficiently. But short of that, yeah, I do think we can do a lot more. It's not just small family gatherings. We can have friends over. We can have probably larger gatherings indoors, especially if everybody is vaccinated.
Yeah, Joe Biden continuing to underpromise and overdeliver. That seems to be a lot of what he is doing, and it's working out well. He said maybe if everybody gets vaccinated, we'll be able to have barbecues on July 4th. A lot of people went crazy. You don't tell me whether or not I can have a barbecue. I'm having a barbecue with everybody over. I'm going to have all kinds of meat. Every animal there is going to be on that grill. I'm going to barbecue the hell out of it. And if somebody brings any kind of vegetable burger of any sort, they're going to be thrown the F out. Sorry, I don't know who that guy is, but I'm sure he exists. Anyway, Dr. Ajish Shah saying, well, maybe we can do even more than that. I hope he's right. And finally, on COVID, I wanted to play for you this clip from Sanjay Gupta's CNN special called COVID War, the Pandemic Doctors Speak Out. He spoke with about 6 different experts and former Trump officials for this documentary that aired last night. And in this clip, Dr. Sanjay Gupta asked Dr. Birx if she thought there were preventable deaths. Could we have mitigated more and saved more lives?
When you look at your data now and you think, okay, had we mitigated earlier, had we actually paused earlier and actually done it, how much of an impact do you think that would have made?
Well, I look at it this way. The first time we have an excuse, there were about 100,000 deaths that came from that original surge. All of the rest of them, in my mind, could have been mitigated or decreased substantially.
All right, so we know COVID has killed over almost 600,000 Americans alone over the past year. You know what other public health issue has killed a lot of people and could be even more preventable? Guns. Yeah, mostly suicides, but then homicides. Mass shootings don't happen nearly as often as the prior two, but get the most attention. Therefore, we are again talking about guns. The leading senator on this issue is Senator Chris Murphy, who was elected after the Newtown shootings. He's so good on this, and he was asked on Meet the Press by moderator Chuck Todd if he thought they could actually get legislation passed on anything that would bring down violence and keep guns out of violent people's hands.
What do you believe is possible right now?
I'm not interested in getting 50 votes in the Senate. I'm interested in getting 60 votes. That's what is required to pass a piece of legislation today. And so I've been instructed by Senator Schumer to work over the next several weeks with Democrats and willing Republicans to try to get a bill that expands background checks that can pass, that can get votes from both sides. Don't count us out. I think the politics have shifted dramatically since 2013, even since 2016, the last time that we had a vote on background checks. Remember, 2019, after El Paso and Dayton, we came very close to passing a background checks expansion proposal that President Trump actually drafted and put before the Congress. It was the Ukraine scandal that got in the way. But I've gotten a lot of calls from Republicans in the Senate who don't want to fight this fight any longer because the NRA's authority is fading. The anti-gun violence movement's impact is increasing. I think we have a chance.
Well, I like his optimism there, and if anything is going to get done, it's going to require Republicans, if they don't get rid of the filibuster, and they're going to try to do some things. Apparently, it sounds like with 60 votes, that'll require this Senator, Pat Toomey, to be on board. And I love how people position him as a moderate. He's not. He just isn't as bad as Ted Cruz. Here he is also on Meet the Press after Chris Murphy. You got to hear this. It's absolutely nuts, in my opinion. Chuck Todd asked Senator Toomey if he thought America had too many guns. I think he said we have like 400 million guns. Listen to Pat Toomey.
No, I don't think the answer is too many guns, Chuck. If I have 4 or 5 guns and I buy 2 more, did America become a more dangerous place? I don't think so.
You don't think so? I mean, we could quibble about it, but the more guns, the more potential they are to do harm, to get in the wrong people's hands. If you want to have that many guns, fine. You got to register them. You have to have insurance for them. There have to be locks on them. This is what we're saying. Laws, controls, regulations. That's the compromise. If you really want to have that many guns, you've got to follow these rules. It's like having a car, people keep saying. Get a car, you have to have insurance for it. You got to get locks on it. It's got to have tires on it. Come on, son.
I'm not a dangerous person. My focus has always been...
Your focus has never been anywhere. You stink. You're not a dangerous person. What if your kid gets one of those guns and decides to kill himself, herself? I mean, that shit happens all the time. That's why guns are dangerous. That's why there have to be laws around them, you jackass.
Make it more difficult for people that we all agree shouldn't have firearms.
We definitely don't agree on who those people are. We are having a major long-term disagreement on who should and shouldn't get guns. And even if we did all agree on who shouldn't get guns, you know that most Republican senators aren't going to do anything about anyone getting a gun. They want you to have as many guns and as many bullets as you want. It's basically their platform.
Make it more difficult for them to get firearms. That is, violent criminals, the dangerously mentally ill. That's what we should focus on, and trying to understand what drives the madness that we've seen again recently and all so often that leads to these horrific mass killings. You know, whether a law-abiding citizen owns 3 guns or 4, that has absolutely no impact on anybody's safety.
I mean, how can you even possibly a law-abiding citizen? You're a law-abiding citizen until you aren't. You bought the gun legally. You didn't have any problems in your background that would have red flagged it. I mean, it's the entire answer just fired me up so much that I had to keep stopping it and interrupting and arguing with Senator Pat Toomey, who later on in this interview, I heard this interview while I was setting up the new shed, and I was outraged because of what he says here about voting rights, because he asked him about the bills to restore the Voting Rights Act, and Senator Pat Toomey hems and haws, but then he says this.
The Democrats have been driving this message on H.R. 1, And I think we ought to be asking our Democratic colleagues, why are they so insistent that we not have any mechanism to verify that a person seeking to vote is, in fact, the person that they say they are?
Oh, pick me. It's because we don't have a problem with that. Because you are offering a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. That's the answer to your question. I mean, listen to what Heather McGhee says coming up next, but it's like 0.3%. This isn't a problem. Voter fraud has not occurred at any kind of rate that's affected the outcome of any election anywhere, I think, ever. And there's no reason to fix this. This last election was the most secure, potentially, of our lifetime, according to Trump's people. There weren't these irregularities. There weren't these problems. And all that in spite of the fact that we were living through a major pandemic and having to change the way that we vote. And we still did it efficiently, or they did it efficiently, the people who ran the elections. All right. And then he goes on to make up other issues that aren't issues. Listen.
Mechanism to verify that a person seeking to vote is, in fact, the person that they say they are? Why are they so insistent that people ought to be able to go ballot harvesting, maybe go through a nursing home and get a couple of hundred ballots that just happen to be whatever they are?
Well, what are you talking about? They just happen to be whatever they are, ballot harvesting. Get rid of that stupid phrase. It sounds terrible. It sounds really corrupt and illegal and bad. No, it's a bunch of people in a nursing home. They have their ballots and they want to send them in. Somebody collects all the ballots and drops them off at the polling place. By the way, they're trying to make that harder. They're trying to make drop-off harder. They're trying to say you can only drop them off at these times or change the times. They try to make it all as difficult as they can for no reason. There aren't any problems.
I mean, there is a completely false narrative about so-called voter suppression. You look at the Georgia law. There's no voter suppression. Sunday voting is still allowed. There's an...
All right, I'm done with this guy. He's just lying. He's just lying now. Here is Heather McGhee, who wraps this all up on the panel on Meet the Press. She was on this show a couple of weeks ago. Love Heather McGhee. You got to get her new book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. Here she is.
Well, this is what happens when people who can't win a fair election try to rig the rules to make it harder for eligible citizens to vote. This is what you see happening. And it is a racist logic. It is an old tradition in this country of targeting policies that we know disproportionately impact black and brown voters. We know that black and brown voters, for example, are less likely to have a government-issued photo identification. And yet, this is the way that systemic racism so often works today. It's also true that when you look at white Americans who are young, white Americans who are low income, 1 out of 5 of them don't have a photo ID issued by the government. And yet, are they any less eligible citizens with the right to vote? The idea of voter fraud is something that happens 0.00003% of our elections. And yet it is a big lie. Instead, we have the For the People Act that actually could address this creeping corruption in our democracy, whether it's the big flood of secret money, the partisan gerrymandering, or this desire to rig the rules so that eligible citizens can't vote. And the only way the Republicans can justify what is a bipartisan, actually majority of the American people support the provisions of the For the People Act, the only way the Republicans can justify opposing it and these 250 unpopular laws at the state level is with this big lie.
Yeah, Heather McGhee, bringing it home. Great, concise analysis, in my opinion. Love listening to her and reading her. Such a good book. All right, and this is fun. On Saturdays, The Cross Connection on MSNBC, host Tiffany Cross ripped into Meghan McCain on The View. Take a listen to this good stuff. I'll start it with a montage of Meghan McCain saying my father over and over, and it ends with Tiffany Cross really dropping the mic.
Father, my 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 father.
But yes, let's talk identity politics. Feminist writer Barbara Smith was among the 3 women who coined the term identity politics, and the original intent of the phrase was articulating black women's struggle at the nexus of race, gender, and class oppressions. But just like with hairstyles, Meghan, we've watched you take it, twist it, braid it, and lock it so it benefits the warped presentation of your own clumsy and ill-informed thoughts. Now, name me any group that does not bring their identity into the ballot box. When MAGA-donning Trump supporters showed up in droves, how often did we hear the term white economic anxiety? And note how white voters are always given cute little nicknames like Joe the Plumber or soccer moms or NASCAR dads. All of that, Megan, is identity politics. And when it came to every other voting bloc, we were simply identified by our race, as if these cute little colloquialisms couldn't be applicable to the rising majority of America. Now, let's address this preposterous notion that somehow being a woman of color suggests that you aren't qualified. I actually understand why you may feel this way. Perhaps you assume that a person's ethnic identity may afford them some advantage. It's called projection, when one unconsciously ascribes traits that you don't like about yourself and attribute them to someone else, like, I don't know, if my only talent was who I was related to, I may assume that everyone else had some similar unfair advantage, you know? But try being an ally instead of an adversary, because just so you know, in 2020, over 11 million Asian American Pacific Islanders were eligible voters, and those who did cast ballots played a huge role in electing President Biden. So the same way spoiled little gun-toting faux Christian narcissists get to make demands of their chosen politicians, so too do those of us who helped pave the way for this administration. The latest data we could get our hands on show that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are barely 3% of the broadcast media workforce, yet they are the fastest growing demographic in this country and represent nearly 6% of the population. Everyone deserves to see themselves reflected in this space. And as someone who grew up yearning to see my lived experience reflected back to me, and then had to crawl, claw, and fight at every turn to take up space in broadcast media, I simply ask, how dare you? From now on, I hope you speak less and listen more, and take a little time to enjoy this view. We'll be right back.
Woo-wee! Tiffany Cross laying the smackdown on Meghan McCain. And a lovely view it is. She's doing a great job. And love her book. It's called Say It Louder, Black Voters, White Narratives, and Saving Our Democracy. And you can hear my conversation with her about that book on this podcast, episode 117. All right, one more clip I want to play for you. This one comes from the always great Mehdi Hassan, who on his show on MSNBC, he does this minute rant, hashtag minute rant, and last night's was on Republicans threatening both democracy and public safety, which are the two big stories, and he combines them. Listen to this.
Start the clock. If you have any doubts that the modern GOP is morphing into an authoritarian, violent cult, check out Michigan GOP Chair Ron Weiser. Last Thursday, Weiser repeatedly referred to Michigan's governor, secretary of state, and attorney general, all women, as witches, and talked about getting them ready for, quote, burning at the stake. He joked that the only way to get rid of the two Michigan Republican members of Congress, Fred Upton and Peter Meyer, who voted to impeach Donald Trump, was either voting them out or, quote, assassination. Hilarious, but this is no joke. There was a plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer of Michigan barely 6 months ago. GOP Representative Peter Meyer has talked about buying body armor because of the sheer volume of death threats he gets. The Capitol Police say threats against members of Congress were up 94% in the first 2 months of this year compared to the same period last year. And it wasn't just the attack on the Capitol by Trump supporters. 56% of Republicans in a recent poll agreed that the traditional American way of life is disappearing so fast that we may have to use force to save it. 39% endorsed a statement that explicitly backed violent actions. So the threat to democracy in this country is not just from voter suppression laws, it's from senior members of a party that continue to incite violence against their opponents without any consequence, without any shame.
He did it. He did it in a minute with that cheesy music in the background. All right. Well, that is all of the sound and headlines I've got. Let's see what is left. It's not COVID. It's not politics. It is important and interesting. It's time for the news dump. Everything that's left. And more new jingles, a whole bunch from Pete Coe sent them, longtime listener and subscriber. I haven't heard this one. Here we go.
Brown bear visitor takes a great big dump. It's floating in your pool on today's news dump.
I was hoping for some kind of a kerplunk splash, Pete, of the poop in the pool. Very well. Very good. Can't wait for it tomorrow as you sent me a whole bunch. Let's get to the news Let's start in Maryland, where they found a cannonball from the Civil War, apparently, and it was disposed by the bomb squad. Unexploded military ordnance has been found in the state of Maryland before. Imagine that, if you're a real estate agent. Yes, this house is for sale, and I think you're really going to like it. And we found no undetonated ordnance or explosives, bombs, or cannonballs anywhere on the property. All right, moving on. The average gas price jumped a nickel per gallon to $2.94. I say get an EV. Who's got an EV? Who's getting an EV? Have you gotten one? If you have one, let me know. I bought my Chevy Bolt in 2011, and now the electric battery after 150,000 miles is gone. I desperately want a Tesla or something similar. The ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal is out, folks. I guess it's called the Ever Given. Finally freed. They removed 27,000 cubic feet of sand from the canal banks, and they apparently got it out. I've been making fun of the captain all last week, but I guess it had a sandstorm. Something to do with a sandstorm, which is how it got stuck there. Listen, I can barely parallel park. Well, actually, I'm pretty good at that. But I'm sure driving a container ship through the Suez Canal is much harder. Sad news, children's author Beverly Cleary died over the weekend. Her books, Henry Huggins, Beezus, Ramona, beloved by kids, including me, worldwide. She passed away at the age of 104. What's the secret? Beverly Cleary, the second oldest male polar bear in the United States, has died after outliving the median life expectancy for the species by more than 10 years. This is in the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden that announced in a statement Saturday that the 31-year-old polar bear, known as, quote, Little One, that's his name, Little One, was humanely euthanized after suffering from renal failure that led to a rapid decline in his health and quality of life. And finally, let's go to Alaska, where some Costco shoppers are saying they've had their groceries stolen by ravens in the store parking lot. I love this story. So this guy said he was packing his groceries into his car in the parking lot of an Anchorage, Alaska Costco when ravens swooped in to steal a short rib, specifically that, from his cart. According to the Anchorage Daily News, this is a real story reported on Friday. He said, I literally took 10 steps away and turned around. 2 ravens came down, instantly grabbed one out of the package, ripped it off, flew off with it, he said. Said the piece of meat was like 4 to 7 inches large, a sizable meal for a sizable bird. Oh, they know what they're doing. It's not their first time, he said. They're very, very fat, so I think they got a whole system there. That's my impression of the guy. I just love that he talked about a specific species and product that it liked. I mean, there was an eagle. It flew down and took all of my grape nuts. There was some kind of woodpecker. It came down and took all, I had a whole bunch of grapes, and it took the grapes. There was a yellow finch. He darted right at me, moved left, moved right, and snatched my fruit roll-ups. Now you do one. Okay, go ahead, do it. Oh, wait. Do one. Tell me what you came up with. Make a voice message and email me your version. What species, bird, and what product did it take? A pigeon flew down the building. I saw him from the beginning to the flight, right up to my grocery bag, where he snatched a can of Hormel chili. That's right, he took a whole can of chili. Okay, I'm done. All right, that is your news dump. It's time to get to my first and only guest today. A couple of weeks ago, I sat down with Frank White, and we got on Zoom, and we had this wonderful conversation. Frank is a really interesting guy who's had quite an interesting life, and I met Frank, or many of us met Frank, because if you're a subscriber and you've ever been to any of our Zoom hangouts, he's been at several of them, and he's kind of held court there because he practices what he preaches. He is the standard that he wants to uphold by actually doing the work. Frank has always been interested in politics, and he worked on the Kerry campaign, but then got cynical about it, went back to the private sector, and did a bunch of different jobs throughout his life. He was a bartender for a while, which he really liked, and he started a nonprofit. But after Trump got elected, like many of us, a spark went off and Frank got in the game. And he describes it back in that game, I should say. I don't think he was ever fully out, but he describes what he saw the stakes were as the moment when Thanos snapped his fingers. 2016 was the first one. And if you won again, that's it. That's all she wrote. And Thanos from the Marvel Super. All right. Anyway, if you don't know the reference, I don't know how to help you. Anyway, I had this great conversation with Frank, and I met Frank through his sister, Frances. Frances is a longtime listener, and they were their brother and sister, of course, and they were living together during a period of time. I think I've got all these details right, during the pandemic. And Frank would join Frances, who was a longtime listener, and I got to know him. And so then I called him up and asked him a whole bunch of questions, did kind of a pre-interview, got to know him, and then asked him if he would tape a conversation with me, and he agreed to it because there are so many fascinating people out there who have led wonderful lives. I mean, just hanging out with Tom from Noble Pies over the weekend, I mean, that guy's had an amazing life. Nick DiFabrizio, who helped me build this shed. So many of you are fascinating, amazing. You've overcome all kinds of adversity, and I'd love to tell your story as well. If you or somebody listens to the show you know would make for an interesting guest for any number of reasons, I'd love to hear from you. But Frank is really, I think, the essence of what I've been trying to do here at Stand Up, which is to stand up. Frank really does the actual work, and I was so happy to talk to him, get to know him. We talked about his life, we talked about his work, we talked about his activism, we talked about race, we talked about it all. Here is my conversation with Frank White, who also, by the way, hosts his own monthly podcast. It's called Phrankley Speaking. You can find that at Spotify, and everything else about Frank will be in the show notes as well. Here we go. So, Frank, I really appreciate you joining me today to talk about the work you've done and a little bit about your life, because I think it's interesting and hopefully inspiring and gives other people ideas to do some of the similar things, if they want, to make some of the similar choices that you've done. So thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure. It is an absolute pleasure. Love being a part of the community, even though I'm not as much. My sister is the one that got us hooked up. She loves the show, she's been listening to you for years and years when you had the original podcast and everything. So I want to give her a shout out. Frances, thanks for hooking it up. Pete, Dominic, pleasure.
Yeah, Frances is great. I haven't gotten to know her as well as I'd like, and as I have certain listeners, but we've definitely corresponded. She's awesome whenever we hang out in the Zooms. But you guys, by the way, seem really close. Tell me, if you don't mind, just a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your personal experience in life and so on. I always think it's interesting when we're introducing new folks to each other. But tell me just a little bit about your childhood. Did you move around a lot? I'm confused. It feels like you've lived in a few different places, but maybe that's more adult.
No, actually, so we grew up in Hood, Philly. I'm a little older than my sister, so I grew up in Hood, Philly, and then my dad moved us to suburban Philadelphia area. So, when you're a Philadelphian, you're either inner city Philly or you're not Philly. When you move out of Philadelphia, now everybody else sees you as Philly if you live in like Bensalem or King of Prussia or Collegeville, which is where we moved to. And so as a result of that like shift from the inner city to the suburbs, as siblings, we became really close because nobody had that experience that we had, specifically moving from like the hood. We called it the brick. It was one of those big, not a project building, but like one of those big brick, like apartment buildings in the hood. And then we moved to like one of these like sprawling community developments in the suburbs where we watched our house get built. And, it was just like a plot of land, and then they built it, and then it became our room. And so, we just kind of, as black kids in an all-white community, having moved from an all-black community, we kind of became friends and frenemies. We were original frenemies.
You kept looking around for other people that were like you that might be able to relate to a little bit better, and the only person you found was your sister?
And brother. More so my brother. He's the middle child.
Okay.
He's actually
forgive me,
but yeah, he was
How old were you when you guys made that move?
So I think I was like 13, which would have made Francis like 7.
So tell me about that. So did you go to an all white, like what, 8th grade? 9th?
Yeah,
8th grade?
8th grade, and then because we moved to a rental complex while they were building our house, and I was bad. You know, I'm a teenager at this point, so I'm bad. I'm setting off firecrackers. I'm getting with girls. I'm playing sports, doing bad in school all of a sudden. I was really, really smart until I learned girls in sports, and I was like, you know what? All the smart stuff, I'm done with it. I want to be popular. And being popular in the hood, you do bad stuff. You know, I want to do hood rat things with my hood rat friends. And so they took me to the suburbs. They were like, no, you're not to be trusted. You're moving to the suburbs. And I rebelled. I was like, and that was when dating myself, but like Malcolm X movie came out. So I was like fist in the air, Black Power. You move me to the suburbs with all these white kids. I'm not with it. And there were no black kids really at my school. You know, it was like less than 3%. And then some of them that were there were like mixed or had like, I don't want to say gotten used to a white community, but they got used to a white community, so they weren't like my type of black. I was like fresh out of the hood, attitude problem, super pro-black, super Malcolm X, Spike Lee movies and all of that stuff. So it was like a real change. And sister, she was young at the time, so she didn't grow up in that environment, you know, so she wasn't as like, I don't want to say radical. That sounds a little extreme for a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, but it, you know, I was kind of like,
I think we understand what you mean by any boy at 13. I can relate to actually a lot of what you're saying in terms of doing well in school and then all of a sudden not being interested. Also in terms of moving when I was 7 years old from the city to watching a home be built. But I can't relate to what it's like to be a minority at 13 in a new community, much less just the new kid at school. That can go, you know, sideways quick, or depending on, you know, how good looking you are, could be a big hit somehow. But I can't imagine 13 the way you're describing it and what you had been learning and going through. So what happened? I mean, did you make friends? Were they mean to you? Were they kind to you? Were they open? Were they shut?
You know, it's funny because hindsight is 20/20. And in retrospect, it was a great experience. You know, I learned a lot. They weren't really mean to me. I only had one person call me the N-word, and I did actually like
that was the principal.
Bang his head off of no adults, no adults. They were, although I did have a very contentious relationship with some of my teachers. That was the big deal.
I interrupted you. You were about to say who that was.
I'm not going to put him out there, but I did like I banged his head off of the side of a wall for using that term to me.
But what happened? I'm actually. Do you not want to talk about what happened there? Like, how does I'm always fascinated that happens. That you would say, you know, any kind of hate term. It seems so like something you only see in the movies. For many of us, you don't remember that. You don't have that crucible moment. But to be such in a situation like that and to have that experience, I think it's interesting when people talk about it. If you want to skip over, it's fine.
It was stupid. It was that sort of thing where he said it, and I was like, "Don't say that again." I'm not with that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think he was listening. It was that thing where I can't say the N-word, and I was like, "No, you can't. And he was like, "Well, I'm gonna say it anyway." And I'm like, I'm gonna knock you out if you do. So don't play with me like that. And he went there, and next thing you know, I was just compelled to bang his head off the wall. And well, he said it again and like got up in my face and was like, N-word, you know what I mean? And I was like, bam. Not a punch, like the pie face, the classic pie face up, mashed his face up against the wall.
You mashed his face.
And then like huffed, like got real big and wanted to see what he was going to do. And then everybody came around and everybody was like, ooh. And, you know, we jostled for a little bit, but that was it. That's all I needed to do. And I felt accomplished. I really, to tell you the truth, it was one of those things where I was like, yeah, don't play with me, nobody. I'm the big, bad, tough guy in town. We not doing that no more. And no, it never happened again. Nobody ever came at me sideways with any type of like racial stuff. In fact, the thing that I had to deal with the most was that idea that you're like black, but you're also like white. You speak well. You speak good. That was the main thing that I had to deal with both in the white community and the black community, was that idea.
So let's call it code switching and tell me what's wrong with it or how it was not received well or kindly.
Well, the thing is, I never code switched. You know, I had grandfathers, strong black men that were like, you have to speak well. You know, I couldn't say yeah or yup or any of that.
Couldn't say yup?
I had to say yes.
Never heard of that.
No. You never heard yup?
No, I've never heard of, I don't think, nobody really, we didn't have a lot of talks about language, I feel like, in my childhood. I can't quite relate, but I didn't know yup was like a shorthand kind of disrespect, but fine. I mean, it's always interesting. So go ahead. You had people, strong men that talked to you about how you should be talking. Why? What did they say and why?
How I should be speaking. Not even talking, speaking. That's
Forgive
the
me.
thing. Like, to me, they were very much about like presenting your best self at all times. When you're in your friend bubble, you can talk friend talk. But other than that, you have to present yourself properly at all times.
Well, that's code switching.
Yes, but as a
it's
result,
like I see it now with my kids. They talk completely differently and their friends to each other than they do to us. And I think we see it a lot of times, that phrase we think of different, like ethnically, but I think you talk differently in front of your bosses or your wife even sometimes than you would with.
And so, but in order, you're correct, but in order to actually get comfortable, you have to be one of my best of best friends.
Sure. Got it.
Other than that, I talk the way I talk to everybody. So when I would go back to the hood, it wasn't like, okay, now I'm safe. You know, it was more like I still have to speak a certain way when I'm out in public because this is the way I have to project myself. And so I use the same slang with everybody. And sometimes people don't understand me, but I also use the same, you know, like vocabulary and diction and things of that nature. So it didn't really do a code switch because that's too hard. That like talking the hood one way and then talk to people another way, it all blended into one sort of vocabulary, one sort of speech. Although I will say, you know, it's funny because I don't curse in public at all. And so when I become friends with certain people that know my public persona and then we become friends and they hear me curse, they're like, what?
So that's when I know that I know that you and I are friends at some point.
Yeah,
right.
Pretty much, actually.
I'm looking forward to that. So I'll nail it right away. I'm like, I think this is it, Frank. We're officially friends. This is some shit. Okay, so are there other people like elders? You'd mentioned strong men in your family. And if I'm going to stereotype, I always think that black women are strong women and often the matriarchs and the most, you know. So, like, what about the women in your life? And if there's anything else, like, the question really is, what other types of things did the elders in your life say, do this, don't do that? I feel like I didn't have a lot of that. But what is that? And what about the ladies?
It's perfect that you asked this because yesterday was Cousin Andrea's birthday.
All right. Happy birthday. Happy birthday, Cousin Andrea.
Happy birthday, Cousin Andrea. I just found out she turned 67 yesterday.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. And she is one of my favorites. You talk about the elders. She was like the first that talked to me about like the intellectual stuff, you know, in the same way that I'm talking about, you know, being able to be like hood, but intellectual. And so she put me onto a lot of books in that era, that was when like Boys in the Hood movie came out and Menace to Society movie, House Party. She's also a big hoop head. So, you know, she's from like the DMV area, so University of Maryland area, but she's also a Tar Heels fan like me. And that was when Rasheed Wallace and Stackhouse. And so I looked forward to being able to go to like Thanksgiving and like family reunions. And her daughter, Corinne, shout out to Corinne, one of my faves. LGBTQ community before that was a thing as well. You know, she represented. And we have these great black intellectual discussions.
Did you not see this woman, your cousin, Andrea, that much? You mentioned, you know, family reunions and stuff. Like, how much did you see her?
Like twice a year.
Wow.
She lived in D.C. area.
But she was that influential on you in terms of she was like not maybe someone that you didn't know in your life or talked to you in a certain way, introduced you to certain things that you really look forward to.
Yeah, she was one of my favorites.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
And then flip side, always around, my auntie, rest in peace. That was my dad's sister. And she was just there, omnipresent, hanging over at the crib. She was my first like babysitter and whatnot. Very, very smart. Also, again, because how family goes, she had her demons from time to time and stuff. But just a laugh that was infectious. My biggest fan. She was always there for me. Always like give me advice. So I have a lot of strong women in my life. And those two specifically, Cousin Andrea and Auntie, were just like superstars.
I like this conversation. I like to ask people. I like to learn about those types of people in their life and what roles they played. I think it's super interesting when you're getting to know somebody, but it also makes you think about who those people might be in your life or who you might want to be in other people's lives, which is something else that you told me about, that you adopted your cousin. Can we talk about that for a moment?
Well, for sure, because that auntie, that was her son that our family adopted. Again, like I said, she had her, you know, issues and things of that nature.
Yeah, sure.
And he grew up in inner city Philadelphia like we did, but we moved to the suburbs. And, yo, the hood is rough, man. It's rough. You know, it's a lot to deal with sometimes. And didn't want him going the wrong way. And I was moving on. He's like 8 years younger than me. So it was a situation where it was like, yo, take Garrett to Oklahoma. My family moved to Oklahoma. And they were like, yeah, we're bringing Garrett to Oklahoma. And it's funny because his best friend went to Oklahoma University and played in the NFL for a while. And they're still...
Why did your family move to Oklahoma? How old were you then?
Well, I had actually detached. So I was about 18, 19. And my dad got a job offer in Oklahoma and was like, we're moving to Oklahoma. And nobody had anything to say about it. Sis hated it. You talk about Frances. Yo, so now at that point, she's a teenager. She's like 13 years old, 14 years old. And as a black girl moving from suburban Philadelphia area where now she has her friends and she has her circle and she's popular. Yeah. She was kind of an athlete. She was also kind of like a tomboy, but she was getting to kind of be pretty. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now she's moving to Oklahoma where it's like football is life and academics mean nothing. Man, you talk about an angry teenager. So I missed that period because at that
point, out.
I was in school and then I started working in the energy industry, as a matter of fact. So I missed all of that. And that's why they kind of were used to that family structure of having the three. And I was gone, so they were able to fit him in seamlessly, sort of.
Wow. So let me just go back to one thing that you said. When you said the hood is rough. Could you give me an example of what you mean and explain in kind of a experience or?
I'll give you a perfect encapsulating is the idea that like a lot of people tell me they've never been in a fist fight before. They're like, I've never been in a fist fight. And I'm like, I was in fist fights once a week off gate. like just constantly bullied, fighting. You're laughing one moment, and then the next moment you're fighting. Somebody's punching you in the face, you know. I will actually tell a story that I've never told my parents before. I've just started telling this story. So one time there was a big fight, and me and my homeboy are outside and we're watching the fight, and the dude is like, you know, I banged your girl. And so he's like, bruh, it's on. He goes, he walks out. We see, you know, the other dude talking crazy. So we lived in like this apartment building, so it was the lobby. And it was a front where it was like it was supposed to be flowers and stuff, but it was never flowers in there. But it was like an embankment where people sat next to dirt. All right. So he says that, and so the dude goes in the crib and he's like, man, I'm about to mess you up. And he goes back into the apartment complex. And so the dude that said that he banged the other guy's girl is out there, and he's still talking. He's like, yeah, man, you know, in Puerto Rican, and I lived in an all-black and Puerto Rican neighborhood.
Okay.
So hottie Puerto Rican girl, everybody knew, put her business out in the streets, put dude's business out in the streets. Everything is just like, yo, we like, ooh. Well, the dude he was talking about comes back with an ugly stick. And the ugly stick is a bat with a screw in the back.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. Bang, bang, bang.
Starts hitting him with it?
Hits him upside the head with this bat with this screw in it. So, this blood, it's a crime scene. It's literally a crime scene. But the no snitching ethos was real back then. So for years, me and my friend could only talk to me and my friend about it because we weren't there. So didn't share this with anybody, didn't share this with my brother, didn't share this with my sister, didn't share this with my parents, you know what I mean? Because we were not there. And, you know, that type of trauma, it's crazy thinking about it now and having thought about it recently. Like, that was traumatic. It really was, because it was an ugly, pun not intended, ugly situation. And not being able to tell people, it didn't give me nightmares or anything like that, but even now it still like makes me feel like a certain way. And that's the hood. The hood is rough, man.
So yes, a great thank you for sharing that, and I think it's important to talk about it. That's why I asked. But when you say the hood is rough, I think we don't need to know much more than that. But I mean, is there any other thing that's similar to that makes it, you know, creates a lot of adversity in a community? You can also look at certain communities and say, listen, especially, you know, communities where poverty is an issue, that there's a lot of amazing people and heroes and folks who tie a community together as well, and, you know, elders and so on. I mean, but it really sounds like every day can be super challenging when you're just worried about some of the simple, basic things in life.
Well, absolutely. That's the thing. I feel like the base education I got in the hood at the time was so valuable. You know, people talk about how schools aren't that good in the hood, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I was in school in the 80s and early 90s, and the stuff they taught us, it was like a black pride situation. It was like, you have to be better, smarter in order to be equal. And so growing up in the hood, if you took to that message, if you accepted that, we learned about things. We had things called thematic units where they would tie everything in together. So your math, your science, your history, and your English were all about, like, let's say it was states in America or countries in Europe, or like great people, Black History Month or Women's History Month. So it would tie everything together in a way that it wasn't just learning it, but it was like seeing how these things fit and how these things made the world that we live in and your place in the world. So there was a lot of pride and a lot of education going on at the same time. But I will say, on the flip side of the dangers of it, when we moved to the suburbs, the last night there was a gunfight. And so me and my brother are on the floor because the first thing you do when guns are being fired is
get away from the windows.
Get on the floor and flatten out. And we were just looking at each other like, this is wild. Like, goodbye, hood. You know, we don't need this anymore. But it was apropos. Because you don't hear a lot of gunfights. You don't see a lot of gunfights. But when you do a gunfight, it's very, like, clear. In
there's,
mind. Like,
I think what you're describing in the last few minutes, talking about answering my question, what it means to be rough in the hood. There is actually some science and research about the similarities between growing up in certain communities and being in combat. And a lot of times those similarities had to do with actual combat. And it's interesting because you cited the weekly fist fights and when you were getting out, the gunfight. And what that does, you also cited that it creates trauma. And that stuff is never dealt with. So when you move out to a different community, you're not dealing, at least with that kind of trauma. And it sounds like your adolescence was pretty good in terms of not having, being minimalized or marginalized or the subject of a lot of constant hatred. But I can't, most people don't have, I would imagine most people don't have that experience where you live in one community and then you move to a, quote, better, safer community. And I wonder what your thoughts are about your life experience versus other folks who may never have gotten out and how it affected your childhood. Have you thought a lot about that?
I have, because like I said, at the time I hated it. I was mad.
Yeah.
Even when I graduated, I still was like, I missed out on so much. I'll be honest with you. The craziest thing is the idea that you're other to people. And so, like, I didn't really want to date white girls at the time, but I also, as a guy, wanted white girls to think I was handsome. You know what I mean? I wanted to be, like, seen as dateable. And so every time there was a black girl, any black girl that moved into the community, they want to set you up, whether they look good or not. You know what I mean? And there weren't that many. And so it's just like, ooh, this new black girl came. You should date her. She might have been from, like, they had these group homes. So they moved these group home girls into our school, into the suburbs. And they're like, you should date her. And she looked like a brick. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to my beautiful black women out there.
I think what most people hear you saying is that this idea that, what we see this on like sitcoms and reality shows. Oh, there's the two black folks. They're going to get together. But at the same time, you weren't interested in white girls. What was that about? I mean, was that the same with boys? Did you have a lot of white friends in your life and you just weren't as sexually attracted to white girls? Or was it a more like cultural thing, or you felt unsafe dating a white girl, or some other question that I can't come up with?
Like I said, I at the time, it was that Malcolm X thing. You know what I mean? White girls are trouble. That's what it was. Like, flat out, they're trouble. So be careful. Don't.
I got it. So were you tempted, but you didn't want to follow through because you thought bad things could happen?
It took a while. I'll be honest. It took a while to even be attracted. And then it was like, yo, man. Like, yo, some of y'all, because again, I was younger, and so I had just gotten.
There must have been a group of girls who were like, I want to be with the black guy. No, were you not that guy to at least some of them? You were kind of a celebrity in a way.
Back then, the ones that, again, the subtlety of it. You're a guy, so you don't understand the subtlety. But I was mad cool with all of the cheerleaders. So what happened was I had a lung infection when I wanted to play sports. And so I couldn't get a physical pass for basketball at the time. But I tried out for basketball and they were waiting for me to get cleared and I never got cleared. But because of that, I was still a hoop head. So I used to go to all the games. And because I went to all the games, I was friends with all the cheerleaders. And so I just was like cool with all like these hot hottie high school white girls that were cheerleaders. And it was the one mixed girl that I wanted to get with, and she wasn't having it. You know what I mean? And so at the time it was crazy because I wanted to get with her, and then some of the other ones wanted to get with me. Yeah. But I was like, I'm not getting with you.
Listen, dude,
I can't get with this girl.
I mean, now I've been able to relate with you to some extent on several things that you've said here, and especially because it sounds like we're very close in age. But I'm 45. But what you're saying now is really striking a chord with me. My autobiography should be titled "Unrequited Love." And when I finally met my wife, like, I knew she was the one. I was like, oh my God, this woman is she's everything. But I had a long past of liking the girl who didn't necessarily like me. I always had women interested, but for whatever reason, I was always attracted to women that weren't necessarily attracted to me. And it's hard, really hard. You can't. I mean, that's
facts.
But if that's the hardest thing you're dealing with, I could keep talking to you about this, and I wasn't even expecting you to open up with me so much on this. But I'm gonna, if anybody is comfortable with it the way that you are, and is as fascinating and I think different in terms of what I went through as you are, then I'm gonna talk to them, let them go as long as they want. But I do want to talk a little bit about the activism and the organizing that you've been doing as well, which means maybe I've got to skip over some of the other things that you did that make your life interesting, because you've had a lot of experiences and lived in different places. And you and I had a long conversation the other day where I learned a lot about this, and it's all super interesting and important, and it leads us to this. But I want to get to the work that you've been doing over the past couple of years. Just take me a little bit through your experience in politics. You stepped in, you stepped out, you're an intern on this campaign, and then you came back stronger recently in your life. Take me a little bit through your kind of political indoctrination and the teams, the organizations, the campaigns that you worked on. Give me a little resume.
So I'm going to date myself here, but high school, I had a teacher named Salomon. He was the mayor of this suburban town that I lived in before he became a teacher. And he was one of those joke teachers that he never really actually lesson planned or any of that stuff. We watched a lot of movies and things, but he was like projects and activism. So
yeah, that'd be me.
I worked, me too. And so like we used to volunteer at election sites, and we had to do like a book report on like a political person. And I did Eldridge Cleaver, again, going back to that activism stuff, you know?
Okay.
And so he made politics really interesting and following races and things of that nature. And what ended up happening was, fast forward to the college, and I'll go through everything else. I moved to Texas, and I was interning energy company, and then being an energy trader, and the whole like Enron thing happens. And I was like, George Bush got to go. He got to go. And I had read an article about John Kerry in Rolling Stone, because I was one of those music nerds, like Vibe magazine, Rolling Stone, Complex, all of that. And I read about John Kerry, and I was like, this dude is interesting. And then he had a book called The New War. So when he ran for president, I was like, I want to rock with this guy specifically. So I worked for the Kerry campaign. And working for the Kerry campaign was really interesting because he's a nerd. He's a political nerd. So it was a lot of reading and constantly like trying to keep up with his policy decisions and his policy thoughts and things of that nature. And I was like, this is really interesting from a policy side. Mm-hmm. However, from like actual politics side, his nerdism made it tough. And it was like being in high school again, because at that time, Wesley Clark was running, John Edwards was running, Howard Dean was running. So you were like the nerd in the room by being associated with John Kerry. And it was like, this is tough, man. Like, I remember that was the first time I ever had sushi, where we had combined the different groups. So it was like the Edwards group, the Clark group, and everything. We had dinner together, and we went to a sushi spot. And I had never had sushi. And they were making fun of me because I never had sushi before. And I'm like, yo, the earth is dying. People are dying in Iraq. And you're talking about sushi. And in terms of personal growth, one of the things that happened was he wasn't a front runner. And I used to go to his office. It was like this office on the corner in Houston. And nobody ever called. And I would sit there all day and just doodle and whatnot. He wins Iowa, and all of a sudden, I go to the office, nobody's there, and I'm like taking down 40 messages. Everybody wants to call. So then we were a finance office, because in Houston, Texas, you're not going to win the state, but there's a lot of money involved. And so we were tasked with fundraisers and trying to
raising money for the Kerry campaign from the Houston community,
yes,
Texas community.
Funnel the money from Texas, where there's a lot of money, and then put it into the Ohio's and the Floridas and stuff like that. But people that call don't know that. This was the only place to call in this area, and so they would call. And one time, this lady called me with this sad story about how her son, they had saved up money for him to go to college, but then her mother got cancer. So they took the money from the college fund, because at the time I didn't even know that pre-existing conditions thing.
Right.
You know, but she had pre-existing conditions, so she couldn't get insurance. Then she gets cancer, so they take all of their savings and the college savings for their son, and they give it to the mother to help fight her cancer battle.
Horrible.
Meanwhile,
only in America.
Exactly. But meanwhile, the son wants to go to college, so he enlists in the Army so that he can go to college. Sad story short, the mother dies of cancer. The son dies in Iraq.
Oh, my good God. What?
And yes. And that was when I was like, yo, it's real out here. Like all of this like fundraising and stuff like that, all of this politics. And she's like, who do I vote for? Do I vote for Bush? Do I vote for Kerry? And I was like, I don't really know what to say. I'm not qualified to speak on it. I will say that Bush got us into this war. Kerry's trying to get us out of this war, and I've met him and he seems authentic. So fast forward, because getting to the activism part, that's when I really realized that it was about people's lives. It really is that people actually are dealing with struggles that are beyond you. And these politicians do play a part in their lives in terms of policy, in terms of whether or not you go to war, in terms of whether or not you have health care, in terms of whether or not you can support your family with one income or two incomes, or do you have to work 4 jobs? So that's when it really connected. That experience really connected. And it made me say, I want to help people. But then going back to that Mean Girls table with like these people making fun of me for not eating sushi, I'm like, I don't know if this is how it connects. So I did put it on pause, you know, from that experience. I was like, this means a lot to me, but also this can't be it. These people that we elect sometimes and the staffers that they hire aren't necessarily the people that get it done. So how do you get it done? What do you do? And it was a struggle for years and years. We have to be able to understand how much politics do affect our lives and how much these politicians actually do mean, but also not look at them like they're the be all end to this. They're a manifestation of the people. So they're supposed to represent our wants and our needs. But if we don't actively inject ourselves in the process, then they become these like overlords.
Well, how about this? They're the manifestation of the powerful people and influential people and people with money, unless we invest ourselves into it, so that we have a say, that we have a role. Does that make sense? Like, it's like if people, like, I feel like what you're trying to say is if you don't get involved, if you don't do something somehow, then you're just complaining about the broken system. That's like I kind of am hearing, but I don't want to put words.
So absolutely. So you know, one of the things I talk about in the community now, this segue is perfect.
Okay.
My thing, you know, two things brought me back in, like the bat signal going up.
The bat signal?
It was first.
I love it.
Yes, the bat signal. So for years I bartended. It gave me time and money. And those are two important quantities in life.
Everything. It's wealth.
I won't go into how I got into that, although that's an interesting story maybe for next time. But, you know, for me, bartending was being part of the community and an audience, and I got to talk to people, but time and money. And while I was bartending, it gave me opportunity to volunteer, gave me opportunity to be involved in the community, even got involved with different nonprofits and started a nonprofit myself, Behind the Bar. Shout out. But when COVID came... That's
the name of the nonprofit, Behind the Bar.
Behind the Bar, BTB. Trying to build careers for people. Young people that I have my thoughts about college. I won't go into all of that, but I feel like there are a lot of people that need a career, want a career, have talent, have creativity. And we love service. We love going to get drinks. We love going to restaurants, but we don't respect that enough. And especially in the community where a lot of these kids, they don't have the opportunities other people do. This is a career for them. This is an opportunity to actually, you know, provide for you and your family. And we also wanted to do it in a way that makes sense financially and being smart about it, not just going out and partying. So Behind the Bar, again, shout out.
Love it.
But it started because it's like, how can we give back? How can we actually make a difference in our community and make some money? But then COVID comes, and now the industry that I had gotten into, that I had so much brother and sisterhood with people, is now in peril. And it's like, yo, people can't work. We literally can't work. My company, my, you know, cocktail and consulting company can't go out there. What do we do? And then we wanted it to reopen, but we wanted to reopen safely. But instead, I don't want to put it all on the Trumpsters, but the people that were out there like banging on them Capitol doors in Michigan and Wisconsin and doing that, and the pictures of them like, open up, we want a Fuddrucker burger, you know?
Or more specifically, if you're driving at the point, I think, people are against masks and science in general.
Anti-maskers, exactly.
Coming together with a common purpose to fight a goddamn virus. Yeah, but what did that movement, or what did that do to you?
It pissed me off. It pissed me off because they reopened. Science be damned. Everything we had done to that point was about safety. These people got mad and they were like, you know what? Political capital wise, we can't afford to piss them off. So we're going to, you know, rush reopening and put my friends in danger and put theoretically myself in danger. But I was like, no, I'm not going back. Because I can't smile in these people's faces and pour drinks for them and be like, everything's okay in the middle of a pandemic. In fact, what happened was I was like, no, I want to be on the other side. I want science to matter. I want activism to matter. I want it to be important that we bond together to look out for one another and not be selfish with our politics. And then on top of that, I was like, they would have shot black people. They would have shot brown people. You know what I mean? They would have.
If you had raided, if you'd gone to the Capitol armed like that,
ain't no way they would have let that happen.
Right?
No way. And so I said that, and then 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, the George Floyd thing happens, and you see it in action. You see when people go out to protest, now here's the police with the riot shields and the pepper spray and the rubber bullets, and they're acting like this isn't just a protest. This is enemy occupation.
Right.
The language used and the thoughts involved in terms of fighting them. People stormed the Capitol and were able to do it with no problem. People are out here, you know, protesting for human rights, and they're being met with rubber bullets and tear gas and stuff. So I was like, back to that bat signal. I got to get back in the game. I got to get off my couch, even if it means subjecting myself to some of this COVID stuff. I don't know what's going to happen. It's dangerous, but I have to actually be a part of it. Voting in November is not enough. I have to make people realize it's a fight. Going back to my hood upbringing, the fight, it's a fight. Which side are you on? You can't just be a bystander anymore because it's going to affect you one way or another. Are you going to stand up for what's right, or are you going to be passive and let the bad guys win? And so I was like, I'm fighting bad guys. And that's really what it came down to.
So what did you do? This is when you got involved in North Carolina?
And that's when I got involved. And so I was like clicking. How do I get involved? What's going on? And the first thing was, because at the time, so this is like June, you know, COVID is still like an issue. So everything was remote. And they were like, call people. That's what we're doing. Remote. So I would put this beautiful headset I have on now. I bought one from Amazon and made myself like one of those call center people. And I would call Michigan and Wisconsin and North Carolina and swing states and be like, are you registered to vote? Are you going out to vote? And then it became like, support for Joe Biden. Once he got the official nomination, can we count on your support? Can we count on your support? And it was just calling these people in these different states.
How much of that did you do, and what did that do for you?
It's funny because it was like 10 hours a day.
Wow.
So I started volunteering, then I got a job doing it. And they paid me, so now I have to actually do it, Can't just half-ass it. And a lot of people hang up on you. A lot of people don't answer. Then people start like with the nonsense, I don't care. I don't vote. I'm not voting. They lesser of two evils and stuff. And I mean, 10 hours a day, I'm just calling different states. Michigan was the worst because Michigan people just were like abrasive.
Really?
North Carolina, yeah, man.
It's interesting that you can pinpoint. You were calling several states, and that you can really say that, you know what, the people in Michigan were the biggest dicks.
They did not, but they won. Shout out. Unlike North Carolina did not win for Biden, for Kamala. So
then, again, just fast forward, and I want to hear so many stories. I want to hear individual calls, and I just want to keep talking. But I want to talk about the runoff, or let me just get. You didn't answer the question. What did it do for you? And furthermore, when Joe Biden won, what did that do for you? Like, you'd gone through this phase in your life, and I think this is really important for people to hear and to be able to relate to, where you were out and the bat signal came on and you went back in. And getting involved, and then seeing, while in North Carolina, the guy that you tried to help get elected didn't win in the Senate there, which is horrible. But
Cal Cunningham.
Yeah, but this idiot. But then Joe Biden did win. And I think we talked a little bit about your somewhat mixed feelings, but overall, how did you feel about yourself and the work that you did? And how did you feel on, when on that day, on that Saturday, let's say, a few days after the election, when the networks at least certified the results?
So let me fast forward because I do want to put this part in. So I go from calling people to then some door knocking, to then putting together a team, to then building canvassers whose sole focus is door knocking. When I say I was working hard, by the end of the election, I started in Charlotte, then they moved me to Greensboro, they put me in a hotel. Now build a new infrastructure of people. So by the end, I'm working 80 hours a week.
Jeez.
Straight up. At this point, because now I'm responsible for recruiting, all the recruits, getting them out there. We have to make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, not just pretending to do it. We have to bundle PPE for people, make sure they had a proper PPE. We have to do quality control checks. We have to, bundle their materials. We have to give them the messaging, all of that. So I'm fried. When you say by the end of it, I am fried,
I'm sure.
For a cause that I truly believe in. because I'm like, we cannot sustain 4 more years of Donald Trump. We cannot do it. It's like, that's endgame. I used to make the analogy that it's Thanos snapping his hand a second time. The first snap was 2016. If he snapped his fingers the second time, like the endgame, that's a wrap. So we're Avengers. We have to mount. We cannot let that happen. So it was relief.
I love it.
First.
Yeah.
That's the part that, it wasn't an enjoyment. It wasn't like relishing in this great victory. It was like, we lost Iron Man on the way here. You know what I mean? A couple people got fried out. People died from COVID.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. We lost. It's a very good point and analogy, and just a really important reminder of just, yes, you're exhausted because you did so much work for it, but there's this kind of reserved elation because so many people literally died as a result of snap number one. And so many people lost their livelihoods and their health insurance. And it was just, I hear what you're saying. I'm just trying to put it in different words in terms of there's a lot of people that we lost along the way. And you can't forget about that. And that's a really good point. So next, so how did you feel? I mean.
So that's why the Georgia thing, they're like, all right. As soon as you're following the elections and stuff, you're following the Senate and whatnot, and it's not going the way that we expected it to. Because of the Kerry campaign, I was used to losing and that disappointment,
Yep.
And then 2016, I volunteered with Hillary Clinton campaign, wasn't getting paid for it or any of that, but I was knocking doors and doing that thing. And I saw from knocking doors in 2016 the way that was going to go. And it went the way, unfortunately, where Trump won, because being out there, it was this animosity towards Hillary Clinton and this like curiosity towards Donald Trump that I was like, this is ugly. Don't be curious about him. Don't flirt with him. That's not okay. So when, by the time we got to 2020, I was like very scared. I'm like, I've seen this go south. I've seen these things and everybody else is optimistic. And I'm like, I don't know. And so Biden wins. Shout out to Joe Biden. Shout out to America, and the way that it went with like the absentee ballots and things of that nature. Very come from behind-ish type of thing. You could have went to sleep that night scared, and then the next morning it works out. But the Senate was important.
Right.
So important. So important.
Yeah.
I feel like the Senate was more important than the presidency even, because we saw the damage that can be done in both the Obama presidency and the Trump presidency. So I'm like, the Senate is the most important part of this. And I was so discouraged. I was like, man, people don't even understand. They're celebrating this Biden victory, but it really comes down to the Senate.
I agree to a certain extent. I will push back, simply saying that the president of the United States is also to some extent a reflection of the United States and who we are and the soul of the people and so on. And Barack Obama was a great man who was best after a tragedy, as a matter of fact. And Donald Trump was a horrible man who cared about nobody. And Joe Biden seems like a pretty good man who has had a lot of pain in his life and certainly has that sense of empathy, too. He's like grandpa and this kind of cool granddad, and that there's no power in that. But how do we describe that? Do you agree that like the president is to some extent the soul of or reflection of who we are domestically and internationally?
Absolutely. But I'm a nerd. So to me, the policy is the issue. You know what I mean?
I do. I see that too. I mean, I think you're making a very, very important point, but there's something to be said for the things that don't actually count on paper.
But to me, and so that's why part of why I'm in these communities is because of the fact that what you're saying is very important. It's a crucial piece. But That's, to me, is like 25% of the whole.
No, I agree. You have to show results and make improvements in people's lives. Doesn't matter if you show up after a shooting or a natural disaster. You actually have to then follow through. I totally get what you're...
Change in this country comes from the actual legislative measures, whether it's
and that's why the Senate is so important,
statewide or community-wide. And that's the part that I focus on, is the part that is not easy to digest.
You're right, and you're right to focus on that, and I completely agree with you. Just, kind of adding texture and then you putting a good point on it is right. And we do have to make, actual change in people's lives, or you're going to lose the next time because no one will see anything. So now that leads us to your work volunteering and going to Atlanta and working in Georgia. And now we must have, I don't want to fast forward, but I mean, the end game on this election, I don't know. I still don't know how to talk about that or put words, but what were you doing on that campaign? Who were you working with and what kind of work were you doing? And where were you living? You living in Atlanta for the month or something?
So the election ends in November, the first week of November. And then we have to cure ballots. So that extends another week. And I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina. I live in Charlotte. So I'm on the road, right? So the day before we're done, they call me and they say, do you want to go to Georgia? And I'm like, the runoff. I see it already.
Yeah.
As soon as they called me and they said that, I'm like, I'm going to Georgia. Goodness, like, I'm fried. I've been working 80-hour days. But I'm in my mind like, I'm going to Georgia. But I tell them, I'm like, I need a week too. They're like, okay, we'll give you a week. Seriously, they gave me a week. You know what I mean? And they were like, ready to go to Georgia yet? And I'm like, let me get one more weekend. My sister's moving to Asheville. Let me get one more weekend. So what I was doing, I was a field director. So I was in charge. So they're like, well, if you come down here and you don't come right away, you don't necessarily get to build an office. You don't get to be a field director. You might have to be an organizer. Now, at that point, I'm paid, but it's not big pay. So I'm like, okay. So on behalf of BPAC, and let me say this. It's interesting because this was the first election where Democrats made more money than Republicans.
Raised more
money. Raised more money. And so that's where you get all of like those texts and those people knocking at your door and stuff like that. And some people call it dark money. I don't think it's dark money. I think it's politics. And going back to the Citizens United decision nerd stuff, you have to actually use the tools that you're given. And so this time there was money involved as opposed to just volunteering. Yes, you have to use the tools that you're giving. In sports, you don't apologize for drafting a good quarterback. You don't apologize for having money to get free agents to win the Super Bowl. People might say that's cherry picking, but talent costs money. And so it's better to be able to get better talent with that money than to rely on all volunteer work. So it's not just an issue of everybody's doing it from the bottom of their heart. They are, but for them to be able to pay their bills, doing it is important as well. So
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and people should read Jane Mayer's Dark Money, speaking of which, and there's a lot of different things. But shout
out to Jane Meyer.
Yeah, it's a great book, and New Yorker writer. And I've talked about money and campaigns forever, but I don't want to get too bogged down on that because I think
we're not going in the weeds of that.
Yeah.
We're not going in the weeds of that. But I do want to make sure that people understand that, I'm not just, I did volunteer, but I also got paid, and I got paid to specifically.
I think that's great. I think we can be cynical about the way that money's raised and the problems, but the bottom line is you got to have a machine for any campaign, whether you want to sell an idea or crayons, and in this case,
so important.
Yeah, and if you don't, and if you, by the way, if you're bitter about that and you don't like it, sorry to rant, the other side is gonna do it.
That's the key. That's exactly my point. Like, this one was the first time it was tooled properly for Democrats to put themselves in position to win through these tools.
Yeah.
Objectively. And so they're like, you're coming down to Georgia. And so they brought me down to Georgia. But at first, I was a business organizer. And so I'm going to businesses in Atlanta saying, can I put up posters? Can I hand out flyers? Can I talk to you and you provide this message? Can I get a video of you? And I'm actually like connecting with the community and going into nail salons and barber shops and chicken shops and, clothing stores.
Chicken shops.
Chicken shacks is the word I wanted to say, but I didn't want to be derivative. But chicken shacks, they sell wings and stuff.
I know them. I love them. Chicken is...
I love them too. And let me tell you, sometimes they would give me free food. Like if they were down with the cause, they like, you representing?
It's the hardest thing for me in terms of, I don't want to eat animals. I morally don't even like it and don't think it's right. But the hardest thing for me is, and I haven't stopped eating animals. I mean, I've cut down, but I can't stop eating the chickens. And I'm sure people are going to get pissed at me for that. But I'm not gonna lie. When you said chicken shop,
chicken is so delicious.
I knew exactly. It really is, and I hate. By the way, I hate that there's a racial component to it because I love chicken.
Fried chicken too.
Yes,
white people love fried chicken.
Of course they do. We all like delicious things. Okay, so anyway, sorry I went off on the chicken shop.
We need some comedy.
It's fine.
That's fantastic. But yeah, so that's what was going on at first. I'm putting up posters.
Yep.
I'm out in the community. I'm talking to local business owners saying, are you voting? Can you spread the message?
Right.
More so than just going to people. Y'all have influence in your community. Your word means so much to people. I'm connecting with them so that they can connect with their people. And it was so fulfilling on that level. Going back to your idea of what did you get out of
Purposeful.
it? That part was so fulfilling because it's like I'm meeting regular people, also successful people, and also pushing, community, and I would tell them this I'm here for the runoff, but Georgia is in the spotlight. But you got to keep it going, man. It's not just about this runoff. It's going to keep going and keep going. And we need to build power in our communities. We need people out here voting. We need people out here running. We need to make sure that this is something that is a start, not an end. This was not the end of the 2020 election. This was the start of the engagement in building going out to the future. And that's what was fulfilling to me on a granular level from the mission. But then they call me and they say, the Democrats are in the state. You now have to go back to running in office. So now they're like, you're South Atlanta. You're putting together a canvassing team. We're knocking doors again. We're doing the full court press. And then that presents other challenges because now I'm back to that 70, 80 hours. I'm at the office at 6 a.m. in the morning and I'm leaving at 11, 12 at night.
Brutal.
And we're recruiting people in the streets, you know what I mean? We're going to places to get people out. We're doing the social media aspect. I also have to make sure people get paid, make sure people get there when they're supposed to get there. So I'm calling the day before, I'm calling the day of, I'm calling after the fact. This
is what organizing is, and it's a tremendous amount of work for not very much money, especially when you break it down by the amount of hours that you're working. But why do it, man? Why did you do it?
Because, like I said, this is important, bridging from, childhood to being in these situations where the fight is the fight, going from the hood to the suburbs, going into college and, the Kerry campaign and listening to people talk about what's going on in their lives and, sending the kids off to war, having parents with, pre-existing conditions, going back to the Hillary Clinton campaign and seeing the disappointment and the sadness of having a reality TV star as president for 4 years and hoping he doesn't break the country. And guess what? He broke the country.
Badly.
You know? Fast forward to 2020, and now people are at the Capitol banging on the door. First, they pre-gamed it for the mask. We don't want to wear masks. We don't want quarantine. And then, you know, later on, which I'll get to, also the idea of community activism in light of what happened to George Floyd and what happened to Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, seeing what happens when you don't get justice. People are marching for justice, but that justice comes from legislative measures. You know, they don't care about you in these hallowed halls of Congress in certain states until you put people in there that care about you. So it's not enough to march because you can march and they laughing. They coming out in front of their house with the machine gun and the pistol and the mustard on the shirt. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yo, get away from my house.
They got a plum spot at the RNC. What a way to reward them. I understand. No, and you're really hitting this flourish, this crescendo, and I'm glad I asked as a result of why do you do it. That's a pretty damn great example and commentary about why you do it, Frank. And
that's why.
So I want to continue our conversation both privately and publicly and talk more about the work that you do and the experience. I really do want to get into the issues with you because I think you're particularly articulate and animated on that. And that's what people really love you to do, a little bit of it here. But I wanted to have a longer form conversation today so we can get to know you better and talk about the work you do and why you do it and why it makes a difference. So maybe we just wrap it there. And I mean, final thoughts on where we're at. Let me just ask you this. Final thoughts on where we're at as a country and what's next for you, Frank.
We're nowhere near where we need to be. That's the issue. 2020 was kind of a sobering look in where we're at. I was just talking to my business partner today about the idea that, like, you know, pandemics might be a part of the future like climate change events are. So we have to prepare ourselves for a long haul. This is sobering to a certain degree because we take, you ask me, like, what do you get out of this? The victories and stuff. Sum that up. It was such a fulfilling thing knowing that we won the Senate. We're like, yes! I get the call early in the morning. I'm cleaning up the office. I'm about to go home finally. I'm all happy. I'm like, yeah. And then the calls, and the texts start coming in. Did you see what happened at the Capitol? Did you see what happened at the Capitol?
Yeah, that's right. It was the next day. That's right.
Day.
January.
No, it was the same day because we didn't know Ossoff won until the day of the Capitol.
You're right.
We knew
you're right. No, you're right.
Won,
yeah. So it really.
But we didn't know Ossoff won.
Yeah, I described this as you're having sex and it's abruptly destroyed by any number of things. It's just you're so elated by the win, and then you don't ever really get to celebrate it because there's a terrorist attack on the Capitol.
There's a terrorist attack at the Capitol.
Yeah.
So as a result, you don't get to celebrate it.
Right.
I was so happy. I went from the highest level to like, this is why I fight.
Right.
This is why I fight, because the bad guys are going to keep going. They're going to keep, and they're bad guys at this point. All this Republican stuff, CPAC was this weekend. I'll be honest with you. You can say what you want about bipartisanship and things of that nature and the two-party system and its flawed and all of that. There are bad guys out here. There are bad guys. They don't want us to be happy. They don't want us to be healthy. They don't want equality. They don't care about the greater good.
Well,
they are representing this evil deity that is the Orange Menace, and he still survives, and his reach is still part of this entity. So we have to keep fighting. And that's what this is about.
Yeah, and I know that you will. I'm excited to see what's next with you, but I think we can minimize it to, the white and black hats, or good and bad guys, or whatever you want to say, however you want to call it. There are people who believe in democracy, and there are people who don't. And if you are against making voting easy, if you're putting obstacles in the way, then you're on the wrong side of it, because we can't talk about climate change or racial justice or economic policy or education policy or healthcare if we can't agree that we should all be able to vote, and we should make it harder in voting. And there was not a tremendous amount of fraud. And I feel like those are the two sides. Let's talk about voting and access to the ballot. We agree on that, then we can fight. But if you don't agree on that, we've got nothing to talk about in terms of policy. That's how I'm seeing it. If you or anybody listening, wants more nuance or wants to argue, I'm really interested in that discussion.
Absolutely. To me, again, I don't want to say good guys, because there's good guys is derivative, but there are clear bad guys. That's the part that I'm saying. People have their own self-interests. People have things that matter to them. People go about things different ways, and we can quibble about who's good in this.
Sure.
That is what it is. But the bad is what needs to be attacked. Cancer is bad. Let's agree that cancer is bad. And let's fight cancer, And at this point, I really do feel like Trump and that whole anti-science, anti-democracy arm of our society is bad. I'm not saying Joe Biden's good. I'm not saying Kamala Harris is good. I'm not even saying that Stacey Abrams, power to her. She's a good guy, but at the same time, I'm not talking about the good guys. What we're fighting against is injustice. What we're fighting against is, like you say, anti-science, anti-democracy, voters' rights. Those are things that we, principle forward, can fight for and achieve. And it's so important that we make sure that we identify the anti-forces and go full speed ahead, whether it's in the black community, whether it's in the white community, the Asian community, LGBTQ community. We have to do what we have to do to ensure better for everyone. And once we achieve that, then we can go back to quibbling over who's good and who's not on that side.
Frank, thank you very much for talking to me, and I'm really enjoying getting to know you, and I appreciate you letting me have this conversation and hit record on it and post it. I think people are going to take a lot from it.
Yes, indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing, bridging the gap from comedy to community to greater things and greater concepts of how we can make the world a better place, make our communities a better place, make our country a better place. That's where it's at. And I appreciate you for that. And I thank you for this opportunity so much.
I'm psyched to be along the ride with you, buddy. Thank you.
Power to you.
There you go, Frank White. And he has a podcast monthly, Phrankley Speaking, spelled with a PH. Look for it on Spotify. I hope that you got as much out of that conversation as I did being in it. And if you or someone you know would make for a great guest to tell their life story, I'll do a little pre-interview and we'll get the good stuff and figure out where to go and what to talk about and how you might offer some inspiration, some guidance, some connection to somebody else listening. I'd love to do more of those style interviews here and at different channels that I might be on in the future. So looking forward to more of that, and I hopefully you appreciate it. Like I said, might be doing some lighter posting this week. I'm going to try to get caught up with a whole bunch of other work that I have to do around this podcast, including the website and dealing with some sponsorship opportunities and, well, building my new shed so I can get the garden going. So lots to do. Thank you for supporting me on it. It is free, but it isn't cheap. Please sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't already. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. And now, our very own singer-songwriter, supporter in the stand-up community, one of the best. It's John Kerry. Take us away, John.
They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans the causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Oh, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
All right, I thought I'd try something different with the show ender and go for some accountability. Maybe you would want to join me somehow, and that is I plan to have salad every day this week. Last week, I said, I love salad. I don't know why I don't eat salad more, because salad is so good. I like the way I make salad, and it's so healthy, and so why can't I have it all the time? And I decided I'm going to have salads every day. Nothing crazy. I don't mix my greens with fruit. Some people will have a lettuce, green leaf salad, and then they'll throw like tomatoes or apples or walnuts. I think you people are serial killers. I don't like to mix those things, but I know what I like. You know what you like. So what are you doing to eat healthy this week? Hold me accountable if I don't have salad every single day this week. And I promise that's the last time I'm saying the word salad. Will I do it? Will I even have a salad today, Monday, the 29th of March? Or will I completely abandon this plan right away? We'll see on the Tuesday show ender and more. Thank you. Bye-bye.